Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. We'll have a little episode about kids today. Later on, educational choices, but right now, this is what we call a point of personal privilege. I want to introduce Michelle Sie Whitten. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, John.
Now, we've met because we both have children who have Down syndrome.
That's correct.
And I walked into this world of having a kid with Down syndrome completely knowledgeless about what this was,
Sure.
what it was like, so misunderstood, and it's been an amazing, and I got to tell you, a pretty difficult decade for me. Now, my son Chance is 10 and Sophia's about 11.
That's correct.
And tell me a little bit about your story when you found out.
Well, I think I was similar to you. I had never met a person with Down syndrome. I didn't know anything about Down syndrome. So I got a prenatal diagnosis. It was a screening test that said, oh, you could have a chance. And so I went and got an amnio. And then I had a really terrible experience with the amnio doctor and the genetic counselor, who basically gave me all this bad information and said, you know, your child probably won't live past 3. If your child lives beyond 3, here are all the issues. You know, here's a tissue, Mrs. Whitten, don't cry. You know, 80% of people terminate, or 90%, and you can too. And that was my genetic counseling. So I did not get off on a good foot.
Genetic counseling.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, and they're great genetic counselors. This one was not. And so, so yeah, I didn't know anything, and I had to really do a lot of research. And you know, what we found out, you know, Tom, my husband, and I, was there's this huge spectrum. It's a spectrum condition, and you don't know what you're going to get. And so anyway, for our own personal reasons, we went forward with the pregnancy. We never looked back, and it's been a wonderful journey. It's been challenging, especially in terms of what we want to accomplish for people with Down syndrome, not just for Sophia, but it's been a rewarding journey and a rewarding challenge.
Because of this, you put together the Down Syndrome Foundation.
Yes.
And this does a tremendous amount of research and also a lot of charity giving to organizations
Sure.
that help people like my kid. And I first of all want to thank you. I mean, it's so humbling to know that there are organizations out there. You know, if it wasn't for Children's Hospital,
I know, yeah.
I would have lost yet another child. Chance has been through a dozen. He'll be through 13 surgeries in 10 years, all done at Children's Hospital. And to see the Anschutz Center and what they've been able to do and what your foundation has been able to do, I can't imagine what it would have been like. And it wasn't that long ago. If you had the diagnosis our kids had, your life was going to be pretty miserable and pretty short, and that's not the case anymore.
Sure. I think part of it, though, we stand on the shoulders of the civil and human rights movement of the 60s and all those people that said, you know, deinstitutionalize, let parents keep their kids at home, let kids go to school who have Down syndrome and who are differently abled. So that's the first piece. But then, yeah, we got to take it from there. It's up to you, John. Help me take it from there. And so we all have our part to play. And fortunately, because of my parents, you know, in the cable TV industry, they were like, oh, where are we going to give philanthropic giving? And I was like, I know.
How about your granddaughter?
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
be a good place to do it.
Oh, and they were all over it. And so, you know, part of the kind of birthing of Global Down Syndrome Foundation, if you will, was looking at unmet needs. And there was really almost no research and very poor medical care for children with Down syndrome, very specific, you know, medical care. And so I think what we're delivering on, and which I'm very proud of, is that if you take the Global Down Syndrome Foundation umbrella, you know, the Cernic Institute that does the research, and the C Center at Children's Hospital Colorado that provides medical care, we're delivering on the first and unfortunately only academic home for research and medical care for children with Down syndrome.
It's really amazing, and
yeah.
And it's a whole different world. And I got to tell you, I get depressed sometimes. You know, and I think about my son's future, how I'm going to care for him when I get older. Will he be
Sure.
around on my own? I mean, it can be miserable sometimes, but then it can be completely joyful, and that people with Downs have a magic to them that is unlike any other person. Chance, my son, he let's just say he lives in the moment better than any individual I know. It's like living with John Belushi. I mean, there's no gate, there's no, you know, he just, you think I talk, do what I want to do. He does what he wants to do.
Sure.
What was also a bit interesting was to see the difference with kids his age, his peers, compared to when I was in school.
Sure.
I remember going to government schools, and you saw those kids, you saw the special need kids, and you kind of saw them in the hallway. Other than that, they went someplace, and you don't know what happened. You didn't know their name, you didn't know their personality. They were just locked in. My son goes to school, and everybody there knows him.
Yeah.
And
he probably knows all their names.
He doesn't speak very well, but if he did, he does.
Yes.
We had a little birthday party for him, and 3 of his buddies from school showed up. I cannot imagine being in 4th or 5th grade back then, and some disabled kids invite you to a birthday party, and you show up.
Sure.
I mean, that part is exciting.
It is exciting, and again, I had never even met anybody, so my school must have been so segregated that they were invisible, literally. And I do think that with the early intervention, kids staying at home, being allowed to go to school, and clearly kids learn from their peers. There have been great gains across the board, and the lifespan has more than doubled since the 1980s. That's huge. And let me say, I'm half Italian, you're Italian. All kids will put the fear of God in us because, like if something happens to you, your typical kid will also be, a big question mark. So, we worry about everything. And so there is more worry because of the vulnerability of our children. But I think that giving them a place in society and teaching them how to be able to fend for themselves up to a certain point and giving them an education, I mean, that's all stuff that leads to at least some independence.
You mentioned, building on the shoulders of civil rights.
Yes,
and that
absolutely.
These are people who shouldn't be institutionalized.
Yeah.
And that's changed so much. The civil rights part kind of gets me, in that these are people who don't always enjoy their civil rights. There was a case of a Down syndrome young man who was tackled by a police officer in a theater,
Ethan Saylor.
and he was killed because the cop didn't understand.
Sure.
All he needed to do was wait for his mom, because there's a lot of emotional issues, there's a lot of cognitive issues, and
heartbreaking.
Right, it is heartbreaking that it was a misunderstanding. That these are second-class citizens in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because actually the Global Down Syndrome Foundation is launching the first ever magazine called Down Syndrome Today, working title, and it's a quarterly magazine.
But Down Syndrome Today. Illustrated.
Illustrated. That's right. That's right. You have to have those splashy swimsuits in there too.
Swimsuit edition would be great.
Yeah, it would be great. And so, one of our first features is, where are people with Down syndrome allowed to vote in the United States? And it's very interesting. It's not. They're not allowed to vote in every state, but it's different from state to state. And I think the piece is timely before the November elections. So the civil rights is really important. The human rights, just putting it in perspective. And that's part of what we try to do with our programs, our fashion show. We put the person with Down syndrome front and center, and we let them do their thing. And most of the people in the audience are not related to somebody with Down syndrome.
Let's talk about this, because listen, I have to beg for money to keep the Independence Institute alive. And by the way, I'll be begging you after the credits roll.
And then I'll beg you for
I'll be fine. But your foundation does this fundraiser unlike I've ever seen, and it's a hoot. All organizations do some sort of dinner, some sort of event. They do the run. They do. I mean, all good stuff.
Sure.
You do a fashion show.
Absolutely.
And your models are people with Downs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was amazing to see how many people showed up for this fashion show. Tell me a little bit more about it. How did you come up with the idea?
Well, I wanted to put the paradigm on its head. You have the R word, you have all this terrible stereotypes of bad haircuts, bad clothes.
Republican? Is that the bad? Because I've been called that all my life, and I build up a tolerance.
Yeah, okay. So I guess there's that in common, I don't know. But there's this stereotype, and the idea was, I was sitting with some of my volunteer friends who some of them became staff later, and said, well, I want to put the paradigm on its head. Why don't we do a fashion show? And the kids with fashion are the key, and they're paired with celebrities. So they're even elevated. And that's what we did. And it's kind of been historical because, we sell out 1,200 people every year in Denver. And, kind of the who's who of Denver comes. And it's beyond inspirational. You know, it sounds kind of quaint, but until you go, as you've been, it's the electricity in the room and, you know, the potential that they see of what our children and adults can do that they're really not exposed to on a regular basis.
When are you holding this? Let's get a little early publicity on this.
Sure, thank you. Yes, it's Saturday, October 25th, the Sheraton downtown. And tickets, table sponsorships, you know, auction donations are all wonderfully needed and accepted. And, you know, we have John C. McGinley coming back. He's in Ground Floor. He was in Scrubs and like every Oliver Stone movie. We have Kira Phillips from CNN. We have John Roberts from Fox News. You know, we want to be balanced. We have them both coming. It helps that they're a couple. And, you know, hopefully Quincy will come again, Deandra Dixon, Jamie Foxx's sister. And I think we're going to get a few more stars there. And we have an ambassador coming all the way from Texas who has Down syndrome. And he's going to bring a little Texas to the event, so it's going to be great.
If you want to get information, where do they go for that?
Yes, they can go to the website, www.globaldownsyndrome.org. They can also call us, you know, but, you know, it's really, it's an amazing event. If you want to be inspired, if you just care about, excuse me, you know, the human and civil rights elements, I mean, you'll really get a kick out of this.
All right, so that's a charity side. Let's go to my side of this, which is the political side.
Yes.
And out of all diseases, illnesses, conditions, Down syndrome doesn't get a lot of attention compared to other more politically connected diseases. Tell me, last time we talked, you told me that when it comes to the Institute for Health,
National Institutes of Health,
that Downs was the least funded of all.
Yeah, one of the least funded genetic conditions. And at a certain point in time, it was the least funded genetic condition. We have really, I think, worked well with the National Institutes of Health, in particular the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Childhood Health and Human Development, and the former head of, deputy head, Yvonne Maddox, Dr. Yvonne Maddox, and then there's Dr. Melissa Parisi, all these folks there. They've really understood we need to address this. They've created a registry. They're investing in it. They're getting the word out. And although you don't see the numbers changing yet, I think those people who have focused on this, you know, and I like to think with our push a little bit, are really going to make the world of difference.
Well, that's why seeing healthcare stay strong is so important, and having original research. It's one of the worries I have with changes in healthcare and Obamacare is because I think about people like our kids and where they're going to be without the life-saving inventions and discoveries that we've enjoyed in the last few decades.
Sure, absolutely. And you know, if you think about, our kids do have health issues. Right? They're more prone to Alzheimer's. So we have a huge push at the Cernic Institute for Alzheimer's and Down syndrome studies. And we're going to have a center that has a subspecialty in Down syndrome, the first ever. And it's the only Alzheimer's medical care center in a 600-mile radius of Denver.
Well, thank you for what you do for my son and everyone like him. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the fashion show. And the best part of having a kid with Downs is I got a handicap sticker for my car. Stay tuned.